April 1945. The island of Okinawa becomes the stage for the last and bloodiest battle of the Pacific. Or the American soldiers who landed there, it wasn't just a military operation, it was a nightmare none of them would ever forget. Constant rain, muddy ground, snipers hidden among the hills, trenches carved into the rock, and enemies ready to die rather than surrender. In 72 days of fighting, the island turned into a hell of smoke, fire, and pain. Those who survived spoke of nights spent under relentless bombardment, of comrades lost in an instant, of silences that spoke louder than 1,000 words. Okinawa wasn't just a battle, it was proof of how much a human being can endure and how easily he can break. In this video, we will hear the direct testimonies of American soldiers who lived through that reality. Their words tell of the fear, exhaustion, and despair of those who saw war up close, without filters. To truly understand what Okinawa was, you don't need numbers or strategies, just the voices of those who, unfortunately, lived it firsthand. First testimony: Eugene Sledge. Eugene Bondurant. Sledge was 21 years old when he landed on Okinawa on April 1st, 1945. He was from Mobile, Alabama, and had already fought at Peleliu. He was a mortarman in Company K, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division. What he lived through on Okinawa haunted him for the rest of his life. Decades later, he wrote a memoir that became a classic of war literature. With the Old Breed. This is his testimony. The rains began in May and never stopped. For weeks. The ground turned into a sea of red mud that reached your knees. You'd walk and your boots would get sucked off. You had to pull with all your strength to free one foot, only to sink with the other. Every step was a battle. Every yard gained cost you energy you no longer had. The worst wasn't the mud. It was what you found in it. Corpses, Japanese, ours, it didn't matter. They were buried in the mud, but the rains brought them back to the surface. You moved in the dark, and suddenly your foot would sink into something soft. You knew what it was. You always knew. At first you threw up. After a week, you didn't even notice anymore. The holes we dug filled with water in minutes. We slept in the water, we ate in the water, we fought in the water. Bodies floated in the flooded craters, swollen, black, unrecognizable. Some had been there so long they looked like balloons. The flies were everywhere, clouds so thick you couldn't eat without swallowing a handful. You crushed them in your mouth along with the food. It became normal. The smell was what seeped into your soul. Rotting flesh, cordite, rotten mud, excrement. You breathed it day and night. You felt it on your skin, in your clothes, on your hands, in your hair. Even when you closed your eyes, the smell reminded you where you were. In a cemetery where the living and the dead shared the same space, where the line between being alive and being dead was so thin that sometimes you no longer knew which side you were on. We saw our comrades fall and couldn't even recover their bodies. The Japanese artillery fire was too intense. They stayed there, under the rain, while we kept moving forward. You knew that after a few days they'd be unrecognizable, that they'd become just more flesh to avoid in the mud. Sometimes you recognized a fallen comrade only by his helmet or a badge on his uniform. The rest was just decomposing matter. One day, while digging a new position, my shovel hit something hard. I thought it was a rock. It wasn't. It was the skull of a Japanese soldier, half buried. Around him were shreds of uniform, bones, mud. I covered him back up and kept digging elsewhere. You couldn't afford to think about it. If you thought, you went insane. You had to shut off that part of your brain that recognized horror. You had to become a machine. I saw veteran Marines, men who had fought at Guadalcanal and Peleliu, mentally collapse. One began talking to himself, entire conversations with people who weren't there. Another started laughing for no reason, for hours, until they took him away tied up. A third shot himself in the foot, but said it was an accident. We all knew the truth. No one judged him. In fact, I envied him. He would get out of that hell. We wouldn't. The Japanese never surrendered. Never. They hid in caves, tunnels, bunkers carved into the limestone. You had to burn them alive with flamethrowers. You could hear the screams coming out of the caves. Screams that didn't sound human. Screams that woke you up at night even when you were miles away. After a while you stopped hearing them. Or maybe you got so used to them they just became another background noise, like the rain or the explosions. One night, a Japanese soldier got into our line. I don't know how he did it. Maybe he crawled through the corpses. He had a sword, killed 2 Marines before someone stopped him. When we turned on our flashlights, I saw a boy. He must have been 18, maybe less, lying on the ground with his chest torn open. He was still clutching his rifle. His eyes were open, staring at the black sky. He had a photo in his pocket. We found it later. His mother, I think, or his wife. I don't know. The month of May was the worst. Bloody, muddy May, we called it. We fought to take one ridge and lost another. Wana Draw, Wana Ridge, Half Moon Hill, Horseshoe Ridge. Names that mean nothing to those who weren't there. For us, they were hell. Craters full of filthy water and bodies. Collapsing trenches. Grenades exploding in the mud, covering you with dirt and bits of flesh. I lost count of the dead comrades. I stopped learning the names of replacements. What was the point? They'd be dead in a few days. Sometimes they arrived fresh from training, clean, with eyes still full of hope. You'd look at them and already know they wouldn't last. Some didn't survive the first week. Some not even the first day. When the island was finally declared secure on June 21st, I cried. Not from joy. I cried for everything we'd lost, for everyone who didn't come back, for the part of me that stayed buried in that cursed mud. I cried because I knew I would never be the same again. That the boy from Mobile, Alabama, who loved biology and dreamed of becoming a doctor, had died somewhere among the mud and corpses of Okinawa. Even today, 70 years later, I still have the same nightmare. I'm going back to Okinawa. I'm walking through the mud, and I know that this time, I won't make it out alive. Second testimony. James Red Sullivan. James Sullivan, nicknamed Red for his red hair, was 20 years old and a corporal in the 22nd Marines Regiment, 6th Division. His battalion was sent to capture what the maps called Hill 52, but the Marines immediately renamed it Sugarloaf Hill, a meaningless hill only 15 meters high. It took 10 days and over 2,500 dead and wounded to take it. This is Red's testimony, collected by a journalist years after the war. Sugarloaf didn't look like anything, just a small hill with a few burned trees. You looked at it and thought, we'll take it in a couple of hours. But the Japanese had turned it into a fortress. Every time we tried, we were mowed down. Hidden guns in the nearby hills, Half Moon to the left, Horseshoe to the right, hit us from 3 sides. It was a perfect meat grinder. You ran up, you died. Simple. May 12th was the first assault. My platoon was made up of 42 men. By the end of the day, there were 15 of us left. The others were dead or so badly wounded they'd never come back. We lost the hill that evening. The Japanese counterattacked at night and pushed us back. We had to abandon the wounded. We heard them screaming in the dark. calling for their mothers, calling for God, calling for medics. No one could help them. The next day we tried again, and the day after that, and again. It became an absurd routine. Climb the hill, be pushed back, count the dead, start over. There was no strategy, only brute force. The commanders told us we had to take it at all costs. And we did. The cost was over 2,000 boys. Boys who would never see their 21st birthdays. I remember a lieutenant who had just arrived from training. Fresh, clean, full of ideas about how to do things the right way. I gave him 2 days. He lasted 4 hours. A mortar shell hit him while he was trying to rally the men. The lower half of his body simply disappeared. He stayed conscious for a few minutes, looking at himself without understanding what had happened. He kept saying, "My legs, where are my legs?" Then he was gone. The mortar fire was constant. You couldn't even see where it came from. Just the whistling sound, then the explosion, then someone screaming for a medic, screaming names, screaming in general. After a while you stopped screaming. You became like an automaton. You saw someone die, you crouched down, took their ammo, and kept going. There was no time for grief. Grief was a luxury you couldn't afford. One evening we found shelter in a crater. There were 6 of us. In the water that filled the crater were body parts, an arm, a leg, a head without a body. I don't know whose they were, Japanese, American. It didn't matter. We stayed there all night, in the water with those remains, because outside we would have been killed. One of the guys vomited. Another cried. I just stared at the sky and prayed not to lose my mind. Food was a distant memory. Rations came irregularly. When they arrived, they were often soaked with water or covered in mud. We ate them anyway. You were so hungry you'd eat anything. I saw a guy eat dirt just to fill his stomach. Another chewed grass. A third sucked on rocks to trick his mouth. We lost so many officers that in the end, a 23-year-old sergeant was commanding what was left of the company. He had no idea what to do. None of us did. We just obeyed orders. Move forward. Take that hill. Die trying. The orders were always the same. The results too. On May 18th, we finally took it. Or rather, the Japanese no longer had enough men to defend it. We climbed, expecting to be mowed down as always. Instead, we reached the top. There was no one. Only empty bunkers, charred corpses, and silence. A silence so unnatural after 10 days of constant explosions that it was scarier than enemy fire. When we reached the top, there was no celebration. We were too tired, too empty. We looked at the hill and didn't understand why it had been so important. It was just mud and corpses, like the rest of this damned island. No one spoke. We just sat among the ruins and waited for the next orders. Which came. There was always another hill, another objective, another death. That night I sat in a trench, looking at the stars. I thought of home, of my mother baking apple pie, my father reading the newspaper on the porch, my sister playing the piano. How unreal it all seemed. Like I had died and hadn't realized it. Like hell was a real place. And I was trapped there forever. I never managed to talk about Sugarloaf with anyone who wasn't there. How can you explain it? How do you tell someone you saw 30 guys die in 10 minutes? That you walked on the bodies of your friends because there was nowhere else to put your feet? That you ate sitting next to a corpse because there was nowhere else to sit? You can't. You keep it all inside and let it slowly eat you alive. Until there's nothing left. Third testimony. Thomas Hanley. Thomas Hanley was 26 years old and a captain in the 96th Field Artillery Regiment, 96th Infantry Division. His battalion provided fire support to frontline troops. He spent 82 days firing shells non-stop, sleeping beside the guns, covered in gunpowder and deafening noise. This testimony was taken from a letter he wrote to his wife months after returning home, but sent only years later. "My dear Margaret, I'm writing this letter that you may never read. There are things a man can't say out loud, not even to himself, but I have to put them somewhere, or I'll go completely insane. Or maybe I already am, and this letter is just the final proof. In Okinawa we fired day and night. The 105mm howitzers never stopped. The noise was such that I lost hearing in my right ear. We shouted to communicate even when we were a meter apart. Lips moved, but you couldn't hear the words, only vibrations. After the first few weeks, I stopped hearing the explosions. It was as if my brain had simply turned off that channel to protect itself. But I still hear that constant ringing. I hear it now, as I write to you. The shells came in non-stop. We had to fire so fast the guns became red hot. We cooled them by pouring water over them, which hissed and turned into steam. The men who served the pieces burned their hands even through gloves. Some lost their fingerprints. The skin melted, but they kept firing. Because when you stop firing, the infantry dies. And when the infantry dies, it's your fault. We knew where our shells were going. We saw the explosions on the hills. We saw the smoke. We knew we were killing men, Japanese but still men. We didn't think of them as people. We couldn't. They were just targets, coordinates on a map, numbers coming in over the radio. Fire, reload, fire. It was mathematics. Angle, charge, fire. There were no faces, only numbers. One night we received the order to shell a position where Japanese soldiers had barricaded themselves. There were civilians in the area too. Women, children. We knew it. The officer who gave the order said, "We can't afford to be sentimental. It's war." We fired. I don't know how many we killed that night. I just know I can't forget it. I still see the smoke rising from that valley. Ammunition arrived constantly, crate after crate of shells. We stacked them under tarps, praying the Japanese wouldn't hit us. One direct hit on the ammo dump, and we'd all be blown to pieces. We didn't think about it. Or rather, we thought about it constantly, but couldn't do anything about it. It was like living with a loaded gun pointed at your head 24 hours a day. We lost men. Not as many as the infantry, but we lost them. A corporal was shot by a sniper while carrying shells. A sergeant died when a gun exploded during loading. A defective shell. He was blown to bits. We had to clean the piece before we could use it again. There were parts everywhere. Bones, blood, brain tissue. One of the guys threw up. Then he went back to his post and kept loading. The mud made everything harder. Trucks got stuck. We had to unload the shells by hand and drag them through the mud. Crates weighing 50 kilos. You pulled them through the red slime, slipping, falling, getting back up. Your hands bled. Your muscles screamed. But if you stopped, you died of exhaustion. If you kept going, you died anyway, just more slowly. The May rains were apocalyptic. Water seeped into the instruments, the sights, the breaches. We had to dry everything constantly, but there was no way to stay truly dry. Everything was wet, everything rotted. We developed infections, sores, fungus. One guy lost 3 toes to gangrene. He didn't even go to the hospital. There was no time. We wrapped his feet and he kept serving his gun. Fatigue was the real enemy. After weeks without real sleep, you started seeing things. One soldier swore he saw his daughter running between the guns. Another talked to a comrade who'd been dead 2 weeks. I myself sometimes lost entire minutes. I'd find myself staring into nothing, not knowing how much time had passed. It was like being a sleepwalker while awake. When we got the news that the battle was over, I couldn't believe it. I sat next to my gun, that damned piece I'd served for 82 days, and burst into tears. I don't know why. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was just that I could finally allow myself to feel something. Maybe I was crying for all those shells fired, for all those lives shattered by explosives I had sent flying. Margaret, I came back from Okinawa, but part of me stayed there, buried in the mud, burned by gunpowder, deafened by the blasts. Sometimes I wake up at night and still hear the guns, the roar, the thud of the breach closing, the whistle of the shell leaving. I look at you sleeping beside me, and for a moment I don't know where I am. Then I realize I'm home. But I don't feel home, not anymore. They say we won. They say it was necessary. Maybe it's true. But I know the boys who died don't feel victory, and neither do I. I only hear the echo of all those fired shells. And I wonder how many lives we destroyed, theirs and ours. I wonder if God can forgive what we did. If I can forgive myself. Yours forever, Thomas. Eugene Sledge, Red Sullivan, Thomas Hanley, and thousands of others whose names we don't know were boys who went to do their duty and came back changed forever, or didn't come back at all. The Battle of Okinawa lasted 82 days. More than 12,000 Americans died. Over 110,000 Japanese. Between 40,000 and 150,000 Okinawan civilians. The Americans lost 36 ships sunk and 368 damaged, mainly to kamikaze attacks. Over 5,000 sailors died at sea. The U.S. Navy suffered more losses at Okinawa than in any other battle of the war. The sky was full of Japanese pilots ready to die. The sea was full of wrecks. The land was full of corpses. The cost of Okinawa was so high that it convinced American leaders that invading Japan would be an unimaginable bloodbath. Estimates spoke of millions of dead. Those deaths and that madness contributed to the decision to use atomic bombs. One horror to prevent an even greater one. That is the logic of war, counting the dead and choosing the lower number. Many Okinawa veterans never spoke of what they had lived through. They took their secrets to the grave. This is the true face of war. Remember these names, remember these stories. Not to celebrate war, but to understand it. Tell me in the comments which battle you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video.